As the film The True Cost makes clear, in the developed world, we consume an extraordinary amount of stuff. It's not just clothing, but all sorts of stuff, from small stuff like small smartphones to big stuff like cars. Incidentally, my country, the United States, is a world leader when it comes to consuming all this stuff. Environmentally, this is a double-edged sword, with each side cutting both people and the earth. First, all this stuff is made of natural resources. A smartphone, for example, is made of dozens and dozens of different materials. Some of them, like the lithium used for the battery, cause significant social and environmental problems through their mining, which directly harms workers, including children working in mines, as well as the environment by contaminating air, land, water, and so forth. Second, making stuff requires an enormous amount of energy, which in turn emits greenhouse gases. The manufacturer of a luxury SUV releases 35 metric tons of carbon dioxide or equivalent gases during its production. So, just who is responsible for all this consumption? Is it us, consumers? Or is it the companies that manufacture all this stuff? A variety of corporations and their advocates have long argued that we consumers are the problem. After all, they just make what we want. If we didn't want it, they wouldn't make it, and there wouldn't be a problem. So it sounds simple enough. If we were to believe them, we consumers are to blame. But are we? Something to think about is that corporations have long been in the business of making consumers out of ordinary people. Ideally, insatiable, rampant consumers. Sounds a little like the Matrix, but corporations can be seen as being in the business of making us into the beings that serve them best, consumers. Unfortunately, neither we nor the earth are much served by this enterprise. To the contrary, it can be incredibly detrimental to our species and our planet, as well as all the life that we share this planet with. In order to help explain all this, allow me to repeat a story that I included in my most recent book on writing a new environmental era and moving forward to nature. So, quite a few years ago, while visiting friends, I noticed that their young daughter, who was maybe 6 or 7 at the time, was watching TV. Glancing over from time to time, it was obvious that the show was geared toward young girls. What caught my attention were the ads. Most were selling what you would expect: toys, sugared breakfast cereal, a local theme park. One ad, however, was another beast altogether. It was a major cosmetic corporation showing models having fun on a Caribbean beach. It repeatedly cut to scenes of them applying makeup, which they were having a frolicsome good time doing. Realizing that this ad was running on a show pitched at young girls, I wanted to see how it would end. Were they really trying to sell lipstick to 6-year-olds? As it turns out, they weren't. The ad was not designed to sell a particular product, but rather to sell a brand that makes a broad range of products. It was really just 60 seconds of young women made happy by cosmetics, or, made happy by a particular brand of cosmetics. So were they trying to get 6-year-olds to switch to their brand of eyeliner? If they really were trying to sell cosmetics to young girls, you would have expected that at least some of the models would have been children. Why were they instead just young women on screen? After thinking about it, the frightening answer hit me like a ton of bricks. This cosmetic company, which has been around since the 1930s, decided that they needed to make more than just cosmetics. Astonishingly, they had taken up the business of making consumers. First, they present girls with images of happy and appealing young women. Next, they cut to the source of the happiness, applying and wearing makeup. There is no suggestion the young girls should themselves be wearing the makeup. Instead, it is held out as an essential part of what it is to be a woman. It may take a decade or more, but by repeatedly and subtly suggest that the road to womanhood is paved with cosmetics, a generation of consumers is created whose very sense of self, in this case a gendered self, depends on the product on offer. With so much at stake, the fragile, emerging self-identity of a human being, the desire to have and the fear of being without the product becomes extraordinarily important as it is presented as an essential part of a happy and successful adulthood. Although we may think that industries exist to serve us by providing all sorts of appealing consumer goods, like cosmetics, it is arguably the other way around. Human beings exist to serve those industries. Human consumption is what empowers them. An enormous amount of care and attention is thus given to fashioning human beings willing to work long hours, making disposable income, so that these industries can thrive. It really does sound a little like The Matrix, doesn't it? Today, this particular project has been profoundly ramped up as girls and young women are themselves recruited to help create the new generation of consumers. They do so by first cultivating a following on social media. Once a trend-setting young woman has a sufficient number of subscribers on YouTube, she can monetize this achievement by, for example, selling cosmetics on her channel. It's obvious I have people like Kylie Jenner in mind here. In this sense, the project comes full circle, as the trendsetter herself was arguably fashioned by the cosmetic industry for this role. Ironically, she may see having been conscripted by the cosmetic industry as personally validating and as a great achievement. Maybe, sadly, it was, as girls and young women are certainly encouraged to admire individuals such as this. Of course, all sorts of industries are in the business I'm doing this, and it certainly just doesn't involve girls and young women. And to make a little aside here, isn't it both horrific and fascinating that what we think of as the pinnacle of being glamorous involves unthinkable levels of consumption and hence causes extraordinary damage to our planet and its climate? I'm thinking of things here like flying, which is already the worst thing that you can do environmentally, and then doing it in a personal jet, having rooms full of clothing that you may never wear, living in a house big enough for a dozen families, having your own fleet of luxury or performance cars, and so forth. If this is the American dream, we desperately need to come up with a new one, and quickly, as millions of people aspiring to this lifestyle, such as by living in cookie-cutter McMansions with, palatial closets and four-car garages, this is making the earth uninhabitable for our species. The film, The True Cost, shows us the ugly underside of this consumption machine, which is a disaster for both us and the planet, especially for the people making our clothes. In terms of clothing, the average American purchases over 60 items of clothing every year, and that's not including incidentals like socks and underwear. Thus, although we consumers are seemingly the ones that benefit by this, it is the corporations selling all this stuff that really profit. Our job is to buy, briefly wear, and then dispose, and repeat that, and repeat that, and repeat that. While The True Cost focuses on the fashion industry, this ramped-up consumerism impacts all sorts of products. Incidentally, 150 years ago, Henry David Thoreau desperately tried to convince us of the truth about all this when he argued that the goal of the clothing industry was, quote, not that mankind may be well and honestly clad, but unquestionably that corporations may be enriched. So, at the risk of repeating myself, just who is responsible for all this consumption? Is it us consumers, or is it the companies that manufacture all this stuff? Thoreau certainly thought that the industry was principally to blame. I'm curious to hear what you make of all this. Do you agree with Thoreau? Having been given a glimpse of the inside of the fast fashion industry by The True Cost, what's your response to all this? While this film is all about the fashion industry, are other industries now following suit? In other words, in addition to fast fashion, do we now also have things like fast consumer electronics? On another note, the episode of Patriot Act on the ugly truth of fast fashion provides an interesting supplement to The True Cost. Although it doesn't shockingly take us inside the fashion industry, as The True Cost did with scenes from the Rana Plaza disaster, this Patriot Act episode nonetheless makes it seems to me, an effective critique of the fashion industry. However, what I find particularly interesting here is the format. 1/3 the length of The True Cost. Quite a bit has to be crammed into this episode, yet it does not feel rushed and seem pretty effective. And of course, it manages to make us laugh at all this, laugh out loud in spite of the horrific subject matter. The episode of Patriot Act raises an important question. How should we go about informing the public of issues like this? Full-length documentary is a traditional, and I would argue, nonetheless great approach, but it's not without its shortcomings, as it may not attract a huge audience. So should we be experimenting with other ways of getting the message out, like the comedy of Patriot Act? Do you have any other ideas on how you'd spread this message? It's an important issue, and I'm really curious what you have to say. As usual, I'll select a number of your comments and respond to them in the future episodes, in the deep dive episodes that we do.